What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be reacting to a regional championship finals between Stefan, Mott, and Alexander. I do not even want to try to pronounce the last name because I know I am 100% going to butcher it. But we have the regionals finals in the Mexico Monterrey Regional Championship. And yeah, it was actually recorded, so that was awesome to see. If you want to see the full set before seeing a commentated version or in-depth analysis of it, make sure you go check it out. I'll link it down below in the description, and I highly recommend doing so. But I am going to be breaking down the potential players' thought processes and seeing like what kind of plays that they make and evaluate it. So we do have the team that Stefan brought to the championship with Golden Go with Choice Scarf, which is pretty interesting, with Terra Steel Make It Rain. You have Throat Spray Sylveon with Wish and Yawn, which is an interesting move set. We have a Solvescent Incineroar, the Violite Cypher, which is a Pokemon we have seen in Regulation H before, most notably by a player known as VGC, alongside Focus Sash, Ninetales, and Garganacl. So really interesting Pokemon. It's not like we haven't seen these Pokemon before. In fact, VGC used both Sylveon and Cypher, if I believe I'm correct, in Regulation H. Garganacl, I think Stefan actually used Garganacl back in Regulation H when it first occurred, because of course we had Regulation H and then we moved on to different formats and then we're coming back to Regulation H. So the Garganacl, I think it's a Pokemon he's used before, if I'm not mistaken. Is actually pretty comfortable with. And then the Cypher is just an interesting tech, but Cypher doesn't make a lot of sense because of the fact that the Technician ability with the dual wing beats, it's able to power up weakened moves, and the fact that that dual wing beats is able to take advantage of the Technician actually makes a pretty powerful attack. It's a really fast flying move, and it can be really useful in some cases. Has some decent coverage across the board. A Violet makes it pretty bulky, especially with the Aurora Veil from the Ninetales. So yeah, it definitely makes a ton of sense here. And then we have Alexander's team, which is going to be a pretty much more standard what you would expect from Regulation H, right? We have a pretty bulky core. We have the Loaded Dice Scale Shot Dragonite with Haze, and you have the Rillaboom, which is able to just go for like a fake out. Of course, you have that Assault Vest to be able to take the special attacks with really strong grass coverage and high horsepower, usually in this format over U-turn, to be able to hit Sneasler, as well as Golden Go, King Gambits, Archaldons, and more. We have the Electabuzz, which is a fan staple of Regulation H because of its ability of Follow Me, and the Vital Spirit ability, which makes it pretty much able to wall a Mungus for the most part. And it has some pretty good coverage, with Thunderbolt being one of the few electric type mons that actually can do something in this format, and Taunt to be able to shut down mons, especially because Electabuzz is pretty fast in the format. It's very useful. Then you have stuff like the Black Glasses, Sword Stance, King Gambit with the Terra Dark just to power up even further, alongside Quiver Dance, Covert Cloak, Volcarona with the Terra Fairy option with Terra Blast. We saw this being used and get some pretty good placements at the Latin American International Championship back in the first Regulation H season. It's really powerful. Covert Cloak, of course, prevents the fake outs from Incineroar and Rillabooms, as well as any other secondary effects like Electroweb, Snarls, and more. And it's the Terra Fairy because you want to avoid Scale Shot from opposing Dragonites and be able to threaten them with the Terra Blast because they do resist the Heat Wave naturally. Then you also have the Sneasler with the Focus Sash, running the Poison Touch because you do get a 30% chance to get a Poison with Fake Out, which is nice, and being able to chip away Pokemon is pretty nice, as well as the Dire Claw plus Poison Touch. Very likely to be able to get a status from that combination. Coaching for the King Gambit, the Dragonite to boost their attack, even useful for the Rillaboom as well, and the Fighting Coverage to help out against opposing steals. So based on how I would say matchup wise between like how I'm analyzing these teams, I think it could go either way. I think it's actually kind of evenish. So the reason why I think it's more evenish is because I think one of the big threats to Alexander's team is going to be that Garganacl. This Garganacl, if you look at Alexander's team, nothing really is able to hit the Garganacl for really heavy amounts of damage, right? Especially because Stefan is running the Terra Flying type. And if you look at it, like what hits it super well, like not really too much. The Rillaboom hits it without Terra. You do have the Dragonite with Scale Shot, which will do decent damage, but it's still going to be taking several turns to knock out. You have the Sword Stance King Gambit, which is the main one here. Volcarona, like it resists the Heat Wave, it forces maybe Terastization from Volcarona. You could stay in regular form if possible. The Sneasler really can't touch the Garganacl if it does go for the Terra. And then Electabuzz, yeah, Thunderbolt, but like Electabuzz isn't really known as a damage dealer. It's more of a support Pokemon. So like that Garganacl could be really tough for Alexander. and that could be a bit problematic. Cypher is also a little bit concerning if you're Alexander, because flying weak on Rillaboom, Volcarona, and Sneasler. Dual wing beats bypasses the Focus Sash. Close combat for King Gambit. U-turn will even do a lot of damage to King Gambit. So I'd say like you do have some good counterpoints if you're either player. Like if you're Alexander's side, the King Gambit's super threatening to Stefan's side, right? Because you do have like, it does beat the Golden Go, and Incineroar has to play a bit scared of it. Cypher a bit strange into it, but overall it's all right. Kind of just is able to wall out the ice moves from the Alolan Ninetales since it doesn't have a fairy move. You just got to watch out because the Sylveon with Hyper Voice is a little bit scary, because you're running the Terra Dark set and you don't resist that Hyper Voice, not being a pure Steel type because you do have that Dark typing. So I'd say Stefan might actually have a bit of a better advantage, but granted, there are like a lot of ways Alexander can play around. You can force a terrestrialization, and forcing terrestrialization is pretty huge, right? Because Sneasler's a little bit annoying. It does threaten the Incineroar, the Ninetales, the Garganacl, and the Sylveon without terrestrialization. So if you force one terrestrialization, it could be useful for the others. Volcarona is a little bit scary if played well, because you do have the redirection with the Electabuzz. That Follow Me is super useful into this team in general, especially that Garganacl, because you can taunt the recovers, prevent the Stealth Rocks from going up, and Salt Cure. Like if you just keep spamming Follow Me with Electabuzz, the Garganacl won't be able to move for too much, and it's not like that does give you some opportunities, right, to set up either Quiver Dance with Volcarona or the Saurus Dance with King Gambit. You definitely have some potential there. So I say this matchup might be evenish for the most part. I think both players have enough tools to be able to beat the others while having, like, again, a potential really good game plan. I think for Alexander, I think you could try to use your setup Pokemon here, which is pretty good. I think Sneaser's fantastic offensively against Stefan's team, and again, forcing early terrestrialization so either Volcarona or King Gambit could come into play, because I think those Pokemon are really good if set up properly. And then for Stefan's side, I think you got to be careful about like utilizing your terrestrialization early, and maybe either try to get some quick knockouts or set up for maybe Garganacl endgame, or you could just go for like really strong damage, because you do have like, again, Decipher with dual wing beats, which is pretty scary against Alexander's team, as well as like Hyper Voice does do some pretty good damage, because other than Volcarona, you really don't have the best answers if you're Alexander to Hyper Voice, especially with +1, and it's really hard to actually knock out this Sylveon unless you either A, force terrestrialization, because then you could hit it with really strong physical attacks. And yeah, that's going to be a big point here, I think. So let's get analyzing the match, shall we? All right, so we have team preview of game 1 for the set. We get to find out a little bit more about the HP investment. The Incineroar, it actually looks like it's going to be a faster Incineroar because it doesn't have nearly as much HP investment. So you want to assume that the Incineroar most likely more invested into speed. Faster Incineroars do make a lot of sense because some of them are even to outspeed like Blood Moon or Saluna and some Rillabooms out there. So that could make a lot of sense here, because if you're able to, for instance, Flare Blitz of Rillaboom before it can get a Wood Hammer off into Garganacl, you don't have to force terrestrialization, so that could be a big factor. Also, I did check the pairings of these players, and it does seem that this is their first time playing against each other in this tournament, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if there was like, if Stefan had played like someone with a similar team earlier, but we will find out. However, again, I did make a note there that I think if you're Stefan, you have a lot of different lead options. I think for both players, I'd say Sneasler would be a really good lead. I think if you're Alexander, I think for Stefan, you have some pretty good ones. Incineroar makes a lot of sense, but you do got to watch out for King Gambit, which is a little bit scary. So you might want to lead maybe something else, but we are going to see Sylveon, I think, Ninetales lead, which makes sense because Aurora Veil plus Hyper Voice is actually really hard to break through the Sylveon with the Aurora Veil up, and it's not like Alexander really has anything that can break through it, so, or prevent the Aurora Veil. So we're going to see Electabuzz King Gambit come out from Alexander versus the Ninetales Sylveon, and I'd say this is probably good for Stefan, mainly because you do have the Sylveon, which right now can just freely click Hyper Voice. There's not much you can do here. I would just click Hyper Voice and Aurora Veil. Yep, and that's exactly what he does. Nothing that Alexander can really do to punish. I think here, maybe if you want to go for a taunt, you could go for a taunt if you're Alexander to prevent the yawn from King Gambit. But I think you could also just go for a Thunderbolt and maybe a Sword Stance immediately. It's kind of tough because you have a really rough lead. You could also switch to Volcarona here, which I think is pretty decent of a play here, and either protect Electabuzz, so you have Volcarona that's threatening both of these Pokemon. The thing is, though, this lead just gave a free Aurora Veil. You lose momentum. So Stefan, I think, definitely in the driver's seat for this first game right here, because he is exerting the offensive pressure with the Sylveon. And as we mentioned before, there really isn't much counterplay to the Hyper Voice other than maybe switching in Volcarona, but you still don't do that much damage. We are going to see the King Gambit retreat. This should be Volcarona. Yep, Volcarona to take the Hyper Voice. And then what does Electabuzz do? It looks like it goes on the offense, or it didn't protect, so it's either Taunt or Thunderbolt here. Maybe Taunt into Sylveon makes sense. Yeah, Taunt comes down to Sylveon, so that is going to prevent the yawn, but Stefan just going for the Hyper Voice because he has no reason not to. And yeah, with that Aurora Veil, like, the Sylveon and the Ninetales would have easily eaten the Kowtow Cleaves, even boosted ones, and the Drone Spray is going to be active. So right now, Alexander definitely on a back foot here. Granted, you can still get some decent damage across the board, but right now you need to Quiver Dance up with Volcarona so you can actually take the Sylveon's attacks while threatening some boosted Heat Waves. We're going to see the Electabuzz go for the Protect, which is fine because you want to stall out the turns. These Pokemon can't really do too much damage to Volcarona, especially after Quiver Dances. So it makes a ton of sense here just to stall out the turns, have your resources available, and go for that Quiver Dance. And because of Covert Cloak, the Volcarona never has to worry about a freeze from the Ninetales as the Quiver Dance comes out. And the Sylveon probably just going to go for Hyper Voice. Yep, Hyper Voice. And it should probably do maybe like 20%. It does a lot because it gets a critical hit, it looks like. Yeah, that's really unfortunate for Alexander. You're already down behind, and losing that much health, I think, might be game losing at this point, because I don't really see how you're going to be able to survive the turns. You can go for Heat Wave, but the problem is, yeah, you do a bunch of damage to Ninetales. You're still not doing anything to Sylveon, because Sylveon has really high special defense plus their Aurora Veil up. Yeah, it's really tricky. Like, you could even switch it into Garganical if you are Stefan at this point, but decides, hey, I'm just going to go for attacks at this point. I just play offensive, get the damage that I really need, and I think that's very respectable here. Get a lot of damage with the Blizzard. Thunderbolt going to come out into the Ninetales to break a Focus Sash. Gets a Paralysis. I don't know if that will really be impactful for later. Volcarona is already outspeeding, but maybe. A Hyper Voice is going to come out. Does this knock out the Electabuzz? It is +1. It comes really close, but not a knockout. And we do see the Taunt is wearing out, so maybe for Alexander you might want to reset it, but at this point it's like looking pretty rough regardless. We are going to see, ooh, interesting, Golden Go back, which is definitely curious because I'm surprised we see Golden Go in the back. And we saw Incineroar, so we're going to see Incineroar come out, which makes sense because you want to get Incineroar in before the King Gambit comes back on the field, because you don't want to give it a Defiant boost from the Intimidate, right? So having the Incineroar to actually pressure the King Gambit and have that Fake Out on deck makes a lot of sense here. Also switches it into the Heat Wave pretty well from the Volcarona. Electabuzz is going to protect, and the Heat Wave is going to come out. And as you can see, it just doesn't do much damage to the Sylveon. Hyper Voice is going to come out, but again, this won't knock out the Volcarona. It might put it in Fake Out range. That looks close. I think Volcarona might be able to live Fake Out, but you probably just protect the Volk and you sack the Electabuzz at this point. Maybe if you have a resource in the back, if you're Alexander, you could switch out the Electabuzz, but I don't think you would really want to risk taking a Hyper Voice. You probably just want to go for like a last ditch Taunt or Thunderbolt for chip damage into Sylveon. Like right now, if you are Stefan, you're in a really good spot, and he makes a good play here. The Wish makes a lot of sense because the Protect from Volcarona is super obvious. Goes for the Fake Out and Electabuzz to take the knockout, and then getting that Wish up allows Sylveon to remain healthy because Aurora Veil is about to end, so he wants as much health on the Sylveon remaining. So really good Wish play here. Yeah, really excellent Wish play, because then if Sylveon sticks around the next turn, it gets 50% of its HP recovery the following turn. So very solid. Aurora Veil and Snow do end. I don't think Aurora Veil is going to be set up for the rest of the game, but maybe. We're going to see the Sneasler come in though, and Sneasler pretty decent here because it can throw off a close combat into Incineroar or Dire Claw the Sylveon. You do have Fake Out pressure if you are the Sylveon, but or if you're the Sneasler, you could go for a Fake Out into either slot, but Right now, the Volcarona is super threatened. I think if you're Stefan, you could either go for double attacks at this point. I didn't actually remember what they locked into. And yeah, it's not a great spot. Maybe you could go for a double protect with the Volcarona and try to KO one, assuming you can catch a Terra. You could also go for a Dire Claw status into the Sneasler. But yeah, like at this point, I think if you're Stefan, you have no reason not to go for the Terra Poison at this point with the Sylveon, because the Volcarona is not doing too much damage and the Sneasler won't be able to take a KO. And you can play aggressive here because you do have that wish factor again with the Sylveon. So you're going to heal back up the HP at the end of the turn. So we're gonna see Fake Out come out into the Incineroar, and we're gonna see a Quiver Dance here. So I think Alexander's trying to hope to live the Hyper Voice, but I don't think you're living the Hyper Voice at that range. Like +1 versus +2, maybe barely, but yeah, it doesn't live the Hyper Voice. I think it's a valiant effort though, because then maybe you hope for like a Heat Wave super crit into Sylveon the next turn in close combat, the Incineroar, pick up the knockout. I think that's what Alexander was trying to hope for. But yeah, at this point, like, I think the game is over as King Gambit is going to come out here. And yeah, I just think that the game is probably over at this point. I don't think Sucker Punch crit is going to be enough. You do have Terrestrialization, so maybe you could go for Terra Dark, Sucker Punch crit into Sylveon, or you could go for a Dire Claw status. I think those are probably like your only outs, I think, if you're Alexander. And yeah, like there's not really much that can happen here, I'd say. I think Stefan is really taking the advantage really early on. The crit on Volcarona was super unfortunate, but like it was still going to be tough for Alexander to really be able to break through this wall of the Incineroar plus the Volcarona. But if you had so much health back, you could have just kept stacking Quiver Dances. Like it could have definitely been a way different situation than this, right? Because he also had the close combat into the Incineroar angle plus Heat Wave. Would have been able to do a lot. You would have still had your Volcarona around, and it looked pretty good because there was a Golden Go. So I think the crit definitely really hurt Alexander. I don't think it was game losing for Stefan, but like, yeah, it was super rough. And yeah, it looks like we're not going to see much. The Terra Dark here coaching, hoping for maybe knockout to Sylveon, hoping the game is faster, but Sylveon is naturally faster than the King Gambit, and it's not able to do much here. So just gonna double feint to Hyper Voice, and Stefan is gonna take the first game. I think overall Stefan made really solid plays for pretty much every turn. I can't really say anything that really went wrong, and I think Alexander actually played that really well. Like the only thing that was just unfortunate for him was the crit, right? Like there wasn't really too much because he was in already just a bad lead position. Because if he had led differently, like if he just led the Volcarona, for instance, he would have been in a way better spot, right? He wouldn't have had to waste turns by switching out. He would have had a free Quiver Dance. He could have taunted, and then you could just keep Quiver Dancing without too much worry, right? And had a healthier Volcarona. Unfortunately, he had to waste a turn, which allowed the Throat Spray to be set up from the Sylveon by going for Hyper Voice. And then afterward, like that crit was just pretty bad. So I think maybe you had better outs in the end game of like Dire Claw stuff. Maybe wasting a turn faking out the Incineroar wasn't worth it, but for the most part, like there wasn't really too much because it was pretty down in that game. But I think it would have been interesting to see if the Volcarona didn't get crit, because since it was back Golden Go, it might have been difficult, especially if you get a close combat into the Incineroar and a Heat Wave, because if you knock out the Incineroar, nothing switches into Heat Wave. Like the Golden Go would have gone down to Heat Wave once Aurora Veil was over. The Volcarona would have outsped, and Ninetales, like it was paralyzed. Granted, there could have been Heat Wave misses, so I'm kind of curious on to see how this game 2 will be. I think if you're Stefan though, you're probably not going to bring Golden Go. I don't know. I don't think Golden Go really did anything. Maybe like Stefan brought Golden Go because it's like the one mon that helps out against Sneasler that you could actually switch into Dire Claw and close combat without too much worry. So maybe it's like really respecting the Sneasler, but Golden Go really didn't seem like it was going to get too much value out of here. I think we're probably going to see a different lead. I think you probably want, or at least from Alexander, you don't want to bring King Gambit as a lead, I think, this time, especially if like Stefan does the same thing. I think you probably want to start off with Volcarona. I don't know if Electabuzz is going to start off, because Electabuzz was kind of just awkward. Like sure, it taunted, but Follow Me wasn't really necessary when all the spread moves were happening. So kind of curious on how we're going to see. And it's kind of interesting that Stefan's not bringing the Garganical in this match, because we didn't see a Rillaboom in the last game, so it could have actually put in a lot of work. Granted, it did take him several turns to knock out the Electabuzz, so he might still be worried about the redirection plus the Sword Stance option from the King Gambit. But we're going to see lead of Volcarona and the Sneasler versus the Incineroar and the Sylveon. So yeah, no surprise to see the Volcarona lead, and I kind of like this from Alexander. The Sneasler's putting on a lot of offensive pressure, and I think if in this game you want to be able to actually, you know, force a terrestrialization from Stefan's side. So I think this makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of different options. I think if you are both players, it's kind of awkward. I think Stefan's definitely in the harder position. Caesar threatens the faster fake out, threatens the close combat, threatens dire claw. There's a lot of angles that could go off here. I think Volcarona is just very comfortable to set up Quiver Dance. I think if you're Alexander, you could go offensive immediately and go for the immediate damage, or you could go for a safe fake out Quiver Dance, and that's exactly what it's going to do, right? We're going to see the fake out and Incineroar get that chip damage with the Quiver Dance setup, and then next turn you could get a pin with close combat plus heat wave, or a dire claw heat wave. Both are pretty reasonable plays here. We're going to see Hyper Voice come out from the Sylveon. That does a lot more to Sneasler than I expected. Oh, it's a crit. I was like, that did way more than I would have anticipated from non-boosted Sylveon. But yeah, because Sneasler is like okay special defensive wise. Now, I don't think the crit really matters in the retrospect of Sylveon being able to two-shot the Sneasler. The problem is, I guess the Sneasler will go down to any attack, including fake out from Incineroar. But I think if you're Alexander, you kind of gotta get a call right. If you want to KO the Incineroar, you need to get rid of the Incineroar now, I think, because Sneasler is like the one mon that really pressures the Incineroar. So if you get a close combat heat wave off, you're in a really good spot. But we'll see. Like, Stefan could have switched out the Incineroar. He decides to stay in. We'll see if this works out, because he's going for the Terra Poison to cover for the Dire Claw, being super effective against the Sylveon. But will Alexander fall for that? Heat Wave going to come out, do a ton of damage, solid amount of damage to the Sylveon, and close combat double up will be able to hit the Incineroar, and it does knock out the Incineroar. So that's a pretty big knockout for Alexander. Getting rid of Incineroar is a pretty big offensive threat. And yeah, especially for Volcarona, because the Hyper Voices are not doing too much damage to the Volcarona. As we see the Hyper Voice KO the Sneasler, and the Volcarona, as you can see, is very, very healthy. So kind of curious on what the game plan is, because Stefan has used his terrestrialization. And yeah, Ninetales Golden Go, not gonna be really that great. And we see the King Gambit come out too, and because of the Fairy Terra into Poison Terra, because of the fact that Sylveon lost its fairy typing because it terrestrialized into poison, yeah, now you get hit really hard by the King Gambit, and Sucker Punch is a threat. Kowtow Cleave is a threat. Like, Ninetales can't damage you. There's this Pokemon, so you have to rely on the Sylveon or the Golden Go, and looking really rough. I think Alexander has played this beautifully, being able to really punish again the Golden Go. And I think that's kind of the problem, is there is no switch-ins right here to the Heat Wave on the Volcarona this time around, especially losing the instant like that. We're gonna see the Aurora Veil come out from the Ninetales, as they took a lot of damage from the Heat Wave. Hyper Voice gonna come out, but that's a lot to King Gambit actually. But Kowtow Cleave will finish off the Sylveon, and then we're gonna reveal the last. But unless the Golden Go is faster than the Volcarona, that's a +1 because of Quiver Dance, I don't see how you're beating Heat Wave and the Sucker Punch from the combination. So Golden Go gonna come out, but you already got rid of the Sneasler, so yeah, this is looking super rough. You already Terra too, and if you log into Power Gem, you don't even know what's in the back. You still can't really break through the Gambit either. So Heat Wave gonna come out. Yes, you don't even have to Sucker Punch, I guess, at this point. Maybe reading a trick, I don't know. You could have went for Sucker Punch there, but it doesn't really change too much, because Golden Go again can't really break through this. Shadow Ball gonna come out. That probably doesn't even knock out Volk. Yeah, +1. Nope. And then Kowtow will finish off the Golden Go. So excellent adjustment from Alexander, and I think again getting that Incineroar was huge, right? And I think the problem for Stefan was you didn't bring a mon that could switch into Heat Wave, because I felt the Volcarona adjustment was very likely, because it was like the only mon that could really take the Hyper Voice as well, and because you didn't bring a single fire resist in the back, you kind of stayed in with Incineroar, let it go down, and then you still didn't have a fire resist. So that was like a little bit of the issue right there. I think if you're Stefan, you could definitely adjust. I don't think you're bringing Cypher at this point, unless you really want to lead it, because if you expect Alexander to lead the same thing, you do threaten the dual wing beats, which could be nice, but you are threatened by the Volcarona, and you don't have a defensive Terra type against the fire moves because it's Steel Terra on the Cypher. So I think you might want to actually adjust here with maybe Garganical, because I think Garganical is actually still pretty good, especially if we don't see Rillaboom. We don't know what Alexander brought as the last mob, but I think it's likely, and it does look like we are going to see the Garganical as the back, and I think it makes a lot of sense here. You need to switch into fire moves against the Volcarona, and Garganical is actually really good at breaking through the Volcarona especially, so I think it's pretty solid right there. If you're Alexander's side, you could definitely switch it up, but I'm not too sure. It really depends on your back because you never revealed it, but I'm kind of curious on what he brought it as the back Pokemon. It might have been Electabuzz. I don't think it was Dragonite because I don't think Dragonite does much in this matchup since it's not Tailwind, since it's Extreme Speed Haze. I think Electabuzz could have been the mob, but I think you might want... I think you either want Electabuzz or Rillaboom most likely. Okay, I don't know why my recording decided to stop recording the audio in this point, but as I was saying during that point, it was basically you could decide to bring Electabuzz over Rillaboom if you think the Garganical and Terra Flying will be a problem, because the Rillaboom can't beat the Terra Flying Garganical. So being able to hit it with Thunderbolt, be able to maybe redirect for the Swords Dance Kingambit, those are very, very fine options. So we're going to see the same lead as game 2, the Sneasler Volcarona versus the Sylveon and Incineroar. Looks like we're going to go straight into the action, but a few different mix-ups this time. Fake Out going to come out from the Sneasler into the Incineroar, which did also try to go for Fake Out, as the Quiver Dance does come out from the Volcarona. And we actually did see an adjustment here of going for the Yawn with Sylveon. And I really like this Yawn because basically it buys Stefan some turns right here, because now the Volcarona is forced to either give up its boost in order to not be put to sleep, or it can go for like one more attack before it gets put to sleep. And that's pretty big because that buys Stefan a lot of turns here. So there's a lot you could do here. You could just protect. It is a little bit awkward. We did see the back going to be the Alolan Ninetales and the Garganical. Nothing really switches in well. You don't want to lose the Sash immediately. Nothing switches in the Heat Wave Close Combat other than maybe Garganical. You'd be taking a lot of damage though. You could go for Terastallization, I suppose, but just going to stay in and decide to risk it. Ooh, that's a big Heat Wave dodge from the Incineroar because it gets a crit on the Sylveon, but I think the Incineroar lives to close combat. Yeah, thanks to the Intimidate, but that Heat Wave would have been able to help finish off the Incineroar. So that's massive because the Incineroar gets a huge hit off in the Volcarona. Maybe that Flare Blitz, and Stefan didn't really have the best damage output against the Volcarona with the Sylveon intact. And now Volcarona pretty much just always will go down to a Salt Cure and doesn't even have that option to maybe go for Terastallization to get out of the 4x weakness. So yeah, that is a pretty big one. Hyper Voice doing a lot of damage to the Sneasler after the close combat drop, activating the Throat Spray, and the Volcarona will take turns of sleep. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of an uphill one, I think. I do believe that this is going to be something you could do here if you're Stefan. I think you always have to go to Garganical because Ninetales just risking a bunch of Dire Claws and status isn't that great. The Garganical is pretty solid here because you can go for Salt Cure, and Salt Cure should knock out the Sneasler at this range. So that's actually pretty massive, and I think you would probably want to go for it. It looks like we're actually going to see potential Terra Poison committed. No, yeah, you would probably want to go for Terra Flying on the Garganical because now the Volcarona pretty much just vulnerable to the Salt Cure at this point. You want to make sure that you're not getting hit by like close combat, and there really isn't that much damage output that Alexander has against Terra Flying on the Garganical. It does reveal the Electabuzz, so Thunderbolt should be able to do some big damage, but only the first hit will really do that much because of the fact that this Garganical does have the Moranga Berry, which will activate and give it a +1 special defense boost when hit by a special move. I see Sylveon Protect here, which makes sense because you do want to just make sure the Sylveon is able to stick around. The Volcarona will take its first turn of sleep, and the Salt Cure will go off into what was the Sneasler and is able to start chipping away at this Electabuzz for some pretty consistent damage. So I'd say that's still a pretty good turn for Stefan right here. He does have to risk a potential wake up here. Wake up would not be great. You can go for hyper voice, or you could go for maybe the wish, because maybe you want that recovery, and it looks like we are going to see that wish option. And the Salt Cure, just trying to get rid of Volcarona, because boosted Volcarona a little bit scary, especially because of the fact that it is +1 special defense. Heat Wave is really hard for Stefan to switch into. Wants to get rid of Volcarona as soon as the board hits, and if the Electabuzz decides to go for Follow Me, it's not like a terrible position for him. So I do respect it. I'm kind of curious on if we're just going to see a Thunderbolt thrown off immediately or not. We're going to see Protect actually to stall out some turns. Okay, which is interesting. Maybe trying to get a free switch into King Gambit here if you're Alexander, maybe get a Swords Dance up, but Hyper Voice would do a ton of damage, and that does allow the Sylveon to go for the Wish right here. And that Wish is pretty massive, because the next turn the Sylveon will be able to heal, and a Protect is pretty safe no matter what you bring in, so you can get the recovery, and you really can't pressure the Garganacl right now, as the Electabuzz does take some Salt Cure damage. So I say Stefan's in a pretty advantageous position. I do think it's possible though, because we've seen the back being Ninetales. Sylveon and the Ninetales will have a tough time against the Sneasler. So can you break through the Garganacl before bring out the Sneasler is going to be a huge question here. Now, King Gambit does come out. It does take a lot of damage from Hyper Voice. Thunderbolt plus Kowtow Cleave will fail to KO here. So I'm kind of curious on if you're going to go for maybe Protects, or if you're just going to go for the attack right here, because you're not in a very safe spot. Hyper Voice, we saw how much it did last previously, like the first game. It does a ton of damage to the King Gambit, so you got to be fearful of that. Stefan just going to double up the King Gambit slot. Knows is the biggest threat to the Garganacl currently at the moment, because it does have a potential to get a Swords Dance up and really wreak havoc, especially because we do still have a Terrassization on Alexander's side. So a Terra Dark Kowtow Cleave or Sucker Punch would do a ton of damage in the later parts. And we are going to see just Protect from the King Gambit. Thunderbolt going to come out into the Garganacl. I kind of see where you're building up here. You're probably just hoping that Electabuzz maybe takes a Hyper Voice. Then next turn, maybe you go for the double up into the Garganacl to get rid of it. Like, I think that would make the most sense here. Or maybe just try to get a free switch into Sneasler, so you can threaten like Dire Claw into like Terra Dark Sword Stance with the King Gambit. Then you can clear the Garganacl, which is definitely an option here. And you can play a Mind Game. So that I definitely see here. As the Wish is going to come out for the Sylveon and heal it. Salt Cure doesn't knock out the Electabuzz, I believe. Yeah, it barely hangs on. So I'm kind of curious if Stefan will protect the Garganacl, because a Thunderbolt Kowtow will be able to knock out the Garganacl. But of course, if you do go for that, there is the potential to King Gambit going for Sword Stance, which would probably still be a pretty rough spot. And in fact, I think that's even a worse spot actually, because if you do go for the Protect and the free Sword Stance goes up, Sneasler comes in, Dire Claw KOs the Sylveon, and then you go for the Kowtow Cleave into the Garganacl. I don't think it's a fun time. I think we saw an attempt to recover, so you could live a potential Terra Dark +2 Kowtow, but a Thunderbolt is going to come out into the Garganacl. Hyper Voice is going to do a ton of damage right here into the King Gambit and knock out the Electabuzz, as we are going to see the Kowtow, I imagine? Yeah, Kowtow. It was either Kowtow or Sword Stance. Going to come out and knock out the Garganacl, and that is going to put us in a really interesting position. So both players are making like their most optimal moves right here. Like maybe there could have been some capitalization on doubling the Electabuzz, but you don't want to risk the King Gambit really set up that Sword Stance if you are the Stefan, and you really don't want to risk your win condition if you're Alexander. We're going to see the Ninetales and the Sneasler come in, and yeah, it's going to be pretty interesting now, because there is Dire Claw Mind Games, but the thing is Sneasler can only target one, and if it targets the wrong slot and Stefan calls on to Protect, you could just get away with the game instantly. King Gambit can't really do too much with these Fairy types Pokemon, so you really have to rely on the Sneasler to do a lot of damage. We're going to see, I think we're just going to see attacks from Stefan immediately, which, you know, like, it is kind of a hard mind game. You might be able to win with either Fairy as long as you just get rid of Sneasler. So it does make sense here, because if you do get a Sneasler, it can be pretty big. Maybe depending on your investment on the Sylveon, you can maybe survive a Dire Claw, depending on if it's like Jolly or Adamant Sneasler, because Sylveon tends to run a lot of physical defense, especially on a Yawn set. So kind of curious if we're going to see that, but we are going to see Terrassization come out. Wouldn't be surprised if this is going to be that Terra Stellar on the Sneasler, and yeah, that makes sense. You ensure you get the knockout here with a Dire Claw. I assume if you're going to go for Stellar Terra, you're going to go for the Sylveon, because I think you would otherwise Sucker Punch plus Dire Claw the Ninetales and KO it. But yeah, Dire Claw going to come out, knock out the Sylveon, and I think that's a pretty massive one right here. The Sylveon was the one that immediately threatened the King Gambit. Blizzard should do a decent amount of damage since it's Focus Sash Ninetales, so it will be max special attack investment most likely. Does KO the Sneasler, but King Gambit took it pretty well, although I think it will go down to 2 Blizzards. Could be a bit tough. We're gonna see Kowtow. Shouldn't do too much because of the snow defense boost for the ice types, and yeah, like it doesn't do too much. You can stall out the weather turns here if you are Alexander, but actually gonna go aggressive right here. Blizzard gonna come out, and then a Swordsdance gonna come out. So normally I think the position would probably be protect into Swordsdance into protect again to stall out the Aurora Veil, but I think I get what Alexander's going for here. I think what he wanted to do was, because the protect might have been obvious, to stall out the snow turns because of defense boost, and of course like making Blizzard more inaccurate. I think what Alexander wanted to go for was reading the Aurora Veil from Stefan, because like Aurora Veil is actually like a pretty decent mid ground for Stefan because it covers a protect, and even if King Gambit like attacks or sets up, it's like really not doing too much damage because of that Aurora Veil. So I do understand the Source Sands here, but now you don't have the ability to stall out. I think you could have probably went for Source Sands later in the game, like protect, then go for Swords Dance, and then you could play the mind game from there. But I think the immediate going for the Swords Dance is just going to cost him, because I'm pretty sure like now it's just going to come down to Sucker Punch crit on the Ninetales. So let's see. I don't think Sucker Punch will get the Ninetales at this range. You just have to hope. And then also you could play the mind game if you're Stefan. You could go for the Aurora Veil here, and then you absolutely are set. But of course you do risk like double protect from the King Gambit to stall out the Aurora Veil, or not Aurora Veil, the snow. So that's also a factor. Just gonna go for the Sucker Punch. Doesn't get the critical hit, and the Blizzard should take the knockout on King Gambit, and that will be able to seal up the victory. So pretty well played from both players. I feel like it was a pretty strong one. Like I didn't even have to pause that much. Like I don't think the situations were super complicated, because if you're Stefan, you didn't have a switch to Volcarona Heatwave, so you kind of just had to stay in attack. You only had like very few move options. And if you're Alexander, like maybe you could switch out, like we saw the Sneasler switch out, but to preserve it for like Dire Claw close combat against the Sylveon, and of course the Garganical. But otherwise you were pretty much like, you couldn't really waste turns, because if you gave like Stefan options to get like more free Sol Cures, maybe recovers with the Wish, of course, like there wasn't really much you could do. I think both players actually made some pretty optimal decisions for the most part, and it really just came down to this like close end game, right? There were maybe some things that could have been different, of course. Like for instance, there could have been a read on a Sylveon, could have went for the protect, but I don't think Stefan really just wanted to take the risk. Was like, okay, I think I still have a pretty solid end game here with the Alolan Ninetales, even if my Sylveon goes down. If they overread it and they go for the Dire Claw into the Ninetales with like a Sucker Punch Dire Claw double, I do lose if I protect, so might as well go for the Hyper Voice. It just instant wins me the game if I do get it off. And if I don't, like Ninetales can still be able to win on its own. And Alexander kind of making a bit more of a hard aggressive play, especially into the Ninetales on, again, this like Swords Dance, Aurora Veil potential mind game situation. But Stefan just going for the attacks can decide to maybe delay the Aurora Veil till later in the game, which I think is completely understandable, and is able to seal it up from there. So congrats to Stefan. We didn't see the Cypher come out, unfortunately, for this, but I felt like this was a well-played finals. Like there really isn't too much to critique here. Like game one, it was a bit unfortunate with the super big crit at the start with the Volcarona, because the Volcarona, as we saw, like was really good against like Stefan's back. So I'm kind of curious, like if that crit didn't happen, would Stefan have had enough damage output to actually even break through the Volcarona before the Volcarona was able to get like more Quiver Dances, more Heat Waves off? Like it could have been a huge deal. And then I think Alexander had a really beautiful game too, where he was just able to knock out the Incineroar immediately, and that was just massive because that was like a really big damage dealer to Volcarona, and then Volcarona was really just able to sweep from there, right? Especially next to the King Gambit. And then game three was a little bit unfortunate start for Alexander, right? Because there was the ability to just knock out the Incineroar if the Heat Wave connected, but of course Heat Wave sometimes isn't the most accurate move in the world, so Heat Wave did miss the Incineroar. That allowed the Incineroar to get a huge Flare Blitz off, and it would have been a pretty big deal because that Volcarona can no longer go for like Terastallization, so it could like ignore the Sol Cures potentially, and that could have been a big Terra because it would have actually been pretty big just being able to stick around with the Volcarona, maybe have like options to stall out the sleep turns. I do think the yawn adjustment though from Stefan was pretty good, and I felt like his end game was really solid for most part. Like there wasn't really much. Again, this end game could have gone either way, but I felt like Stefan did have like the better options there. And yeah, like he was able to pull out a solid win, and both players I think played extremely strong. So that's going to be the critique. There really isn't too much. I don't even think I really had to pause because it was, again, straightforward. There wasn't really much options. Like they could have maybe made some micro adjustments here and there. Maybe it could have turned the tide of the game, but I feel for the most part, like you saw optimal gameplay. Like there wasn't really too much I really had to say. Like again, maybe there could have been some adjustments we saw from like game 2 of like Stefan maybe not bringing the golden go, but of course that sneezer was a big problem, as we saw in this game 3. Could have actually like went even harder, especially like if we saw an immediate stellar terra. If we saw an immediate stellar terra, that could have gone crazy, and maybe like a switch out from the Volcarona on the turn 2 into like something else, so you KO the Incineroar since the Incineroar stayed in. Like getting a huge knockout on Incineroar, saving the Volcarona around for later could have been massive, and then you still have like Dire Claw for pressure in the later parts of the game, because I don't think King Gambit Terra was really helping because the Sylveon was pretty much sticking around. So Hyper Voice was super threatening. Electabuzz Terra really doesn't matter in this game. And I guess you could still save Terra on Volk. I don't think it's necessary, but yeah, I think that could have been an angle that maybe Alexander could have went for, and maybe not have needed to risk like going for the Heat Wave close combat. Of course, it does cover like Terra options if Stefan does go for it, or maybe like a hard swap. But yeah, I think overall super solid game. If you would like to check out more analysis from me on regionals finals, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more of these for the regionals in general, including internets and worlds finals, so you could check out a bunch of reactions I do for VGC. A lot of this is just for educational purposes, and it's more about just like understanding like what kind of plays, maybe break them down, maybe like highlight like really solid plays, maybe highlight some plays that maybe had a little bit few flaws and I point them out. But overall, it was, again, just more for educational purposes for those who were watching this and maybe were like wondering why the players made the plays that they made. So if you would like to check out the rest of the videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel. As always, you can check out my main channel for VGC content, and of course subscribe to the channel again for more VGC content as always.